How do I avoid re-injury? The strongest predictor of future running injury is previous injury to that area. So if you've had plantar fasciitis in the past, you're much more likely to have plantar fasciitis again in the future than some other runner who's never had it. And it's the same with all of the running injuries. ITB pain, runner's knee, shin splints, Achilles tendonitis, all of them. Every runner will have had a running injury in the past. Most runners get injured on average every second year, and injury is also the most common reason that runners quit running. So the question of how to avoid running injury is extremely important. This is exactly the question that Rita brought to me when we had our free call last year. She'd injured her left hamstring and spent a few months rehabilitating it, and then she'd injured her right hamstring. That was 9 months before our call, and she was still back to running only 20 miles a week when she had been running 50 miles a week. And she was terrified to do more because she felt like she was just going to injure it again. So she couldn't even enjoy those 20 miles. As with most of the runners that I work with, Rita enjoyed running because it helped her feel calm and in control. To get that feeling, though, she found that she really had to run quite a lot. And really, she should be able to run as much as she wants without having to be constantly worried about re injuring her hamstrings. The key to avoiding re injury is to identify what you did wrong in the first place that led to that initial injury. Rita and I spent about an hour discussing all of her problems over the last couple of years. And once we'd finished having a good chat about what she'd been up to, I determined that the way that she was training was almost guaranteed to lead to recurring injuries. So we made a game plan to systematically overhaul all of her training. The first thing to consider is recovery. Rita was running about 50 miles a week every week. She was adapting well to this, but it really didn't leave a lot of room for error. I think of it like a budget. Imagine you had a job that paid $1,000 a week, and you also had a budget to spend about $1,000 a week. And most of the time, you stuck within the budget and it worked out just fine. But here, like with Rita, there isn't a lot of room for error. So if you go $50 over budget each week, that debt is just going to compound and compound. And after a while, you're going to have a ton of debt. In the same way, Rita had been stressing her body more than it could adapt to week on week. That was okay for a while until it wasn't. And as it turned out for Rita, the weakest link in her chain was her hamstrings, so that's where the injuries manifested. Now, imagine you had a weekly budget of $1,000 for that $1,000 paycheck, but every fourth week, your budget only allowed for $500. You really had to tighten the belt that week. What that would mean is that if you accidentally went over in the other 4 weeks, every fourth week, you'd be able to catch up and get back in the black. And that's exactly what we did with Rita. We halved her running volume so that every fourth week she was only running about 50% of the mileage that she was in the other 3 weeks. Now, believe me when I say that she was not happy about this, and she would try and sneak in every little extra miles whenever she could. She would also, every time a recovery week was coming up, she would get on at me trying to ask me if she could add some extra runs here and there and just creep that volume up just a little bit. But to her credit, she stuck to the plan and she was disciplined and went with it. The next thing that we needed to consider with Rita and that you need to consider is resilience. Essentially, all running injuries are the same. You put more stress on that part of the body than it can adapt to. Over time, it gradually breaks down because it doesn't have the resilience to tolerate that level of stress. If you want it to not get injured, you have to increase the resilience of that area so that it can tolerate more stress. Running is the best way to condition that area to tolerate the stresses of running. So you should use running as your primary modality to increase the resilience of that area. So Rita had been running about 50 miles a week, which is a decent amount of running, and she was tolerating that reasonably well until she wasn't. She'd built up a certain level of tolerance and resilience in her hamstrings, but unfortunately, it wasn't enough. The problem was that she was doing all of her runs at about the same pace for about the same duration, the same distance every time. This made her hamstrings very resilient to a very narrow set of stresses. Essentially, the stress tolerance or resilience of her hamstrings was in a very narrow mechanical range, leaving her vulnerable. So we got Rita to slow down on her slow days and speed up on her fast days. We got her doing really long but very slow runs on some of the days of the week and really short, sharp, fast interval sprints on other days. We then later folded in things like tempo and hill sprints in order to increase the range of mechanical stress that was being applied to her hamstrings and thus increase their stress tolerance or their resilience. The last area that you need to consider if you want to avoid re-injury is strength. Now, the stresses that your body will experience during running are attenuated by the strength and power of the muscles in that area. So if your muscles around, let's say, your thigh are stronger and more powerful, they will be able to attenuate some of the impact forces that you're going to experience when you're running. Essentially, if the muscles are stronger, they're going to be better able to protect that area and protect themselves. If you want to avoid re-injury of a specific area, you have to make that area stronger by loading it. Unfortunately, many runners do the exact opposite, doing less exercises focused on that region in order to protect it. The thinking being that if they put less stress on it, they're less likely to injure it. But all that does is allow it to become weaker and more vulnerable. I call this paradox the danger of safety. Rita was actually doing really well on the strength side of things. Her husband's a personal trainer, and she'd been working out in the gym 2 or 3 days a week with a very comprehensive strength and conditioning program. So it was really a case of just tweaking what she was already doing to make sure that we had some specific heavy loading of her deadlifts and split squats, going right up to sort of 5 and 3 rep max, and also some power work with things like kettlebell swings and box jumps to make sure that she had both the strength underlying in that area, but also the power, which is her ability to generate force quickly so that when she's running, her muscles can grab hold of that area and essentially stabilize it. Rita was very patient and disciplined during her rehabilitation. And over the following 6 months, we were slowly able to creep up her weekly mileage all the way back to that 50 miles a week. And her hamstrings felt totally fine by the time she got to that point. What's more important, though, is that she just wasn't worried about re-injury anymore. When she was running, she could relax and feel calm and do the thing that she wanted to do, which was just to run and to feel good and to enjoy it. If any of Rita's story is sounding familiar to you and you don't feel like your coach or your physio or your doctor is listening to you and you really don't feel like you're making progress with your rehabilitation, then feel free to book a free call with us and we'll have a chat and see if we're a good fit to help you. Just click the link in the description and choose a time that works for your schedule and we'll have a chat.